I'd like to call to order the regular meeting, October 28th, 2015, and I'll ask us to stand for the singing of O Canada. I'll ask Director Patterson to do roll call, please.
Trustee Armour.
Present.
First Vice Chair Cartner.
Present.
Trustee Cram.
Present.
Trustee Garrow. Trustee Bill McPherson.
Present.
Trustee Wendy McPherson. Trustee McAllister.
Present.
Second Vice Chair McDonald.
Present.
Chair McMillan.
Present.
Trustee Richards. Present. Trustee Swan.
Present.
Student Trustee Alex McIsaac.
Present.
Thank you. I need a motion to approve the consent agenda items 3.02 to 3.03, moved by Trustee Cartner, seconded by Trustee McDonald, that the Upper Canada School Board approve consent agenda items 3.02 to 3.03, October 28th, 2015 as submitted. Just cast your votes, please. Okay. And Trustee Armour, are you connected to do that? I assume you're in favor? Good, thank you. Are there any conflict of interest? Hang on for a second. I'm not sure if we're getting a bit of a sound through the microphone or through the telephone. If you are, you have like a radio or TV behind you, just mute if you don't mind. It could well be interference as well with the weather, so. Okay, declaration, conflict of declarations. Are there any conflict of interest? Seeing there are none, we're going to move on. There's a report from the private session, October 14th, 2015. There will be two motions motions that come out of that. The first motion is a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board declare Gladstone Annex at 550 9th Street East in Cornwall, Ontario as surplus to its needs under Part 1 of Regulation 444/98 of the Education Act. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Trustee McDonald, seconded by Trustee Bill McPherson. Any comments or questions? Seeing there are none, I'll ask you to cast your vote, please.
I had. Pretty fast.
And Trustee Armour? Thank you very much. That carries. The second motion, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve the sale of Gladstone Annex, 550 9th Street East Cornwall, Ontario, to the City of Cornwall at the proposed sale price, conditional upon approval by the Cornwall City Council. Moved by Trustee McDonald, seconded by Trustee Tartner. Again, comments, questions? Seeing there are none, I'll ask you to cast your votes, please. And that carries. Thank you. Brings us to our next item, which is the branding in the Upper Canada District School Board, and I'm going to turn this over to Superintendent Hobbs.
Thank you, Chair McAllister, or McMillan, I'm sorry. that was an accident, I promise.
We're just trade seats, no problem.
It wasn't clairvoyance or anything.
You're off to a good start, away you go.
I think maybe I should just recuse myself from the meeting. I apologize. Thank you, Chair McMillan. So it's my pleasure to bring a report that was in response to a board motion back in the spring that was directing administration to look at the issue of branding in the Upper Canada District School Board. And for a considerable chunk of time, actually I spent some time trying to understand where we would start. And so what I thought we'd do today is discuss three main areas. And number one is the evolution of the term brand. Because even in the discussions we had around the table and we had with some other people in the community and beyond, what we found is that there's quite a wide-ranging view of what the word brand actually means. I thought we'd look at a little bit about the current state in the UCDSB and then some initial steps at getting started on a more focused and sort of conscious approach to working on our brand. So, the idea of brand. Brands, many of us think about a brand and we equate it to a logo or a look. And I would say that what I wanted to do is start out with some of the reading I did on branding. And it started out in the 1800s where a brand was literally like a cattle brand. It was an imprint or a mark that a rancher might have put on a piece of property. And since that time, though, it's evolved a little bit. So in the 50s, one of the definitions was a name, term, design, symbol, or other feature that distinguishes one seller's product from those of other sellers. So more broadly than a logo. In the 80s, David Ogilvy, who's a famous ad man, defined brand as the intangible sum of a product's attributes. And so you can start seeing that we're progressing from the idea of a mark or a logo to an idea. And then finally, many of you would know Seth Godin, he defines brand as the set of expectations, memories, stories, and relationships that taken together account for a consumer's decision to choose one product or service over another. And so if I started with the 1800s definition, this would probably be a slam dunk project. We'd have a new logo and I'd put it on our cows and we would be done. And but because we're in the 2000s now, I think we want to take a little bit more broad view of what the word brand means and recognize that now it's not as much about the image we put forward as it is about the way our consumers and stakeholders think about us, right? So, next. So I'm not sure if you can see this, but you may have it on your screens. This is a funny little cartoon that a person from essentially a marketing agency shared with me to describe what branding really is. And so if you can sort of follow through, at the top, there's a marketing. There's a guy saying, "I'm a great lover." And moving on, telemarketing is doing the same thing over a phone. Public relations is saying, "Trust me, I'm a great lover." Advertising is repeating the same thing over and over and over. And then finally, you get down to the end where really what branding is all about is not what I'm telling somebody or what we are telling somebody, but what they think of us, right? And I think that that's the win, is starting out by knowing how we want people to think of us, and by the sum total of our actions, eliciting that kind of thinking from them. So a little more research. What are the elements of brand? Well, brand starts with the brand promise. And it's not only the services that we promise to provide, but really what are the feelings that we intend to elicit from people. And so that's something that we really need to talk about, what we want to put forward. I spend a lot of my time obviously working in the realm of IT, and it's actually pretty, compared to education, probably what goes on in the classroom, it's probably fairly straightforward. When we put an email service out, it's pretty easy to actually articulate what the promise is with that, how reliable it will be, how much storage people get, those kinds of things. And we do that consciously. The next piece is brand perception. So it refers to the way consumers think about us. Not necessarily are our class sizes too big or too small, but what are the set of adjectives that a consumer would use when they want to describe the Upper Canada District School Board or one of their schools? Number 3 is brand expectations. So by the time we put a promise together, what ends up happening is, and people have experiences with us, they come to expect certain things of us, and that refers to the brand expectations. The persona is really the personality and tone, so you'll be aware of some organizations in the world adopt sort of a fun and playful tone. So if you look at some of the Geico commercials on TV, they're kind of a fun, playful thing. If you look at bank commercials, they're maybe not as fun and playful, but that makes sense because I don't necessarily want my banker to be fun and playful all the time. So you want them to be serious. So thinking about the tone you come across with is important. And then finally, the brand element. So these are all the things that really tend to be more strongly associated with brand: logo, packaging, and the tangible elements described above. But the important thing, I think, is that those things tend to come last. Another couple things we learned on this kind of little bit of research is about customer journey and consistency. So this is a piece of work from McKinsey where they talk about the idea of a customer journey representing all of the sum total of the interactions a customer has with an organization. So if you think about it, if I go to have a Starbucks coffee in the morning, it's not just about the actual coffee, but it's about the appearance of the place when I walk in the door, the cleanliness, the experience of being in there, how fast it takes to get my coffee, the nature of the service, the atmosphere. And it's not just that one interaction. It's actually the sum total of all my interactions with Starbucks everywhere contributes to my perception of what their brand is. So if you think about this from our perspective, it's not just about winning a customer on one interaction or making sure that when they walk into the school office, they get a pleasant reception. Their customer's perception is going to be formed by their interaction with teachers. It's going to be formed by what they see in terms of the facility. It's going to be formed by many things in addition to all the things that we think of as more traditionally associated with brand. And I think the really important thing for us is that it happens over the course of a 13 or 14 year journey with us. So that's pretty incredible. One of the things that people find is that for large companies, customer journey is harder to measure or harder to control than for smaller companies because there's so many touch points. So if you just think about a Starbucks or an RBC Bank or whatever your favorite large company happens to be, how difficult it is for them to actually, through all those touch points where consumers interact with them, maintain a consistent experience so that they're in control of the customer brand. And by the same token, you can probably think of other examples you've had with companies out there where you've been to one branch or one franchise and had a really negative experience and then gone to another one and had a positive experience. And generally speaking, what you'll find is the positive experiences aren't enough to completely outweigh the negative experiences, right? So it's really hard for us, I think, as a large organization with 90 schools out there and then thousands of teachers and other touch points in the community to control how our perception works. Not to say that it's impossible, but it's difficult. And then finally, negative perception tends to arise when there's a misalignment between what we promise or what we purport to promise and what the actual customer experiences. And in fact, when you actually go out and you are going back to that advertising kind of mentality where I'm going to keep repeating how great we are and the customer is not experiencing the greatness, that's when a lot of frustration arises, right? So that alignment between the promise and the experience is incredibly important. And it's incredibly important to do it consistently and consistently over time. So the bottom line, just this is my little bit of research here. Really, brand is about a thought. It's about, if you were to think about the list of adjectives you would use to describe RBC or Starbucks or Tim Hortons, what are they? And that really kind of becomes the brand. The brand is really, that perception is moderated by the sum total of people's experiences over time. So we have a complex environment, lots of touch points, and people are with us for a long time. So we have a long opportunity to win. We also have many opportunities to lose. And I would say probably the biggest thing I think that's really important is explicitly telling people how we want to be perceived is regarded as pretty weak strategy for improving perception. So generally, telling people weak, changing people's experiences is a much stronger way for influencing the way you're perceived. And it's kind of funny because we know that about learning in the classroom as well, right? So you can talk to kids all day about learning, but really what it boils down to is the experience of it, right? Where it begins to take root. And finally, the consistency of every element of that experience is a major driver. So as we're thinking about our brand, how it's not just about putting your logo everywhere, but it's about making sure that whatever our promise is reflected through every customer touch point. So the UCDSB situation. So just a couple things. First of all, I would say if you think about now brand as being a thought, what are all the touch points or ways that our customers, being parents and students, interact with us? Well, there's a variety of entities, I would say, out there that all play a role in interacting with our students and parents. So schools play a role. They have some latitude to design the experiences that our students and parents have. Departments do. So I know that as an IT department, we've got an IT Twitter account. We have a variety of properties. So there's logos, websites, publications, social media accounts. We have arm's length agencies like Steel, for example, that are out promoting their services with our customers. We have individual people in individual roles, so director, CIO, superintendent, principal, manager, those people play a role. And then we have, I think, personalities. So in a lot of cases, what you find is that sometimes the decisions are made out there and in here are a result of personal preference, right? And so you'll find that when people change roles, the experience changes, or what becomes important changes, right? And so to a certain extent, all of these entities are responsible for designing the customer experience. And the challenge is that they all really have a lot of latitude right now to design that experience any way they see fit. And as a customer goes through their journey from touch point to touch point and sees inconsistency between them, inevitably the customer is going to prefer some things over others. They're going to have better experiences in some areas than others. And that is what makes it a problem for us to define a coherent brand. So again, while the individual experiences with those entities may be positive, the real problem is a lack of consistency, where people start saying, well, how come there's nothing consistent here? So how is this, what's the brand? So the first thing I started out with is thinking, what or who is the Upper Canada District School Board? So a couple things is that, first of all, there's a few pictures up there, and on the left, you can see one of the little graphics is a series of car brands. So the Volkswagen Group in Germany owns a variety of brands. They own Volkswagen, Audi, they own Lamborghini and Bentley, and they own, I think, Fiat and Porsche. And really when you go, well, I shouldn't say when you go, when I don't go, probably none of us go to buy a Bentley, but if somebody goes to buy a Bentley, they really don't want to know that it's a Volkswagen product. That's probably not going to be appealing to them to say, hey, Lamborghini, buy Volkswagen. That's not what they're looking for. So Volkswagen makes a conscious choice to suppress the Volkswagen brand and instead allow their child companies or their subsidiaries to have their own brands, and Volkswagen disappears into the background. On the other end of the spectrum, you have RBC, whereas there's no really local flavor to the local RBC branch, and I would argue that that's probably a good idea, because I don't want to know what the local guy's take on banking is, right? So you really want to know that I have a strong corporation and I'm getting the benefit of that big corporation. And then in the middle somewhere, you have something like a Procter & Gamble, where Procter & Gamble has a ton of products. So they have Tide and Febreze and CoverGirl and all these other products. And what you find oftentimes when you pick up one of these products is the brand of the product is front and center, but in smaller letters, it's a Procter & Gamble company. And why would I want to know Procter & Gamble is behind these products? Is probably because it gives you some confidence to know that there's a big entity that has a good reputation for being socially responsible behind those brands. So for us, I think the challenge is before we start talking about a brand, we have to start thinking a little bit about what's the point of the Upper Canada District School Board? What are we here to do? Are we here to be a Volkswagen where we sort of disappear into the background? Or are we here to be an RBC where all our branches march in lockstep? or do we do something in the middle where we play a different role? And the challenge is that I think my observation is in our environment, different people have different perceptions of what that role is, and it makes it very difficult for us to come out with a coherent experience for our customers, and therefore we struggle with brand. So that's the big question I think we need to grapple with, and I'm not asking you for an answer on it tonight, so just thinking about it. So just getting started. I kind of like to do stuff, so let's do stuff. I think right now is, as we're sort of in this nascent phase of thinking about branding, and there's some big questions out there that we need to answer, or perhaps you need to answer for us. There are some things that we can do at low cost or no cost, just to get our arms around what's there. So as much as I've said, try to talk about the UCDSB current state, we really don't have a good handle on it other than conceptually. So what I would suggest is really 4 steps. Is number 1 is take some steps to define what the current state is. So start to do a bit of an inventory on what we've got out there for consumer touch points and different brands and different logos and slogans and all those kinds of things. The second piece of it, and this is taken from a bit of my experience, those of you who were around the table back in 2007 when I took over the facilities department and got a rough ride, I think, in my first board meeting about getting some projects under control. My inclination now is to design some controls to make sure that it doesn't get any sort of wilder than it already is. So how can we actually start bringing some coherence to what we've got without starting to go out and spend money to design something new? I think then 3, there's an opportunity for us to actually start cleaning up. So bring some coherence to, as an example, my departments have Twitter accounts. Should we have Twitter accounts? I don't know if we should have Twitter accounts. And what's the role of Jeremy Hobbs in representing what the UCDSB does on his social media account? Or should I be adopting a, I don't know, CIO or superintendent of IT role? So those are some things that we can start doing, is bringing some coherence and consolidating. And then finally, I think we can start asking, with that being done and a better sense of where we stand, we can start asking some of those bigger questions, is how do we want to position the actual board compared to schools, for example? Do I want departments, for example, to have an outward face, or do we want to all come under the brand of the Upper Canada District School Board unless you're a school? And those are some big decisions that I don't think we need to make now, but are things that I think that thinking about them would help us both from a brand perspective, and they would also help us operationally, I think, clarify what that relationship is. So some proposed deliverables and timelines. What I would suggest is, I'm not a real big fan usually of striking committees, but in this case, what I would suggest is we need some brand governance, a group of people who sort of have who have ownership of some of those touch points, and also some people who have some vision for how we can proceed forward, right? What I would suggest is we just start out by establishing some governance, so that one of the things as an IT department that we grapple with all the time is, for example, screen real estate on the board's website. So everyone wants one of those buttons, but now the list of buttons is getting so long that we're sort of always mediating about whose button's on top, right? And what we really need, we feel that need for some governance around how are we making these decisions in a way that balances the needs of the stakeholders. I'd suggest we do a current state inventory, so document those major touch points. I would say we stay away from schools for now. Schools have their own identities, and there's enough stuff at the corporate level where right now we can just get our hands around that, and then start talking about those bigger questions, how we relate to schools. I would suggest we can put some processes in for, again, these are the controls, managing the external brand. So if you're thinking about throwing up a new website, we're guilty of it, My Family Room. How does that have to fit in with the Upper Canada brand, right? And those are things that we have control of now, and we can do those fairly easily. And then documenting some new standards and a proposal for consolidating some of the properties that we have out there, I think would be a good next step. And I won't drain this slide, but there's a couple key points I think making that transition from a brand being a mark to a thought, I think is something that's really important. I think that whatever our decision is about how our various entities all contribute to the brand or don't, what's important is that we're explicit about how we want to go to market, if you will, and we're consistent with it throughout the course of the customer journey and across the breadth of our board. And then really, I think the issue for us is we can do some things in the short term. We have a lot of other things going on the board right now, so I think it makes sense to do something that's a little bit more under the radar and get started just sort of consolidating our current position while we think about some of the bigger questions.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Comments or questions? Thank you very much. That was what I liked about it was starting from the history to where we are. And this has been a very difficult topic because trying to narrow down exactly what it is. So I thank you for that. So I'm going to open it up to the trustees, comments or questions. Those on the telephone lines, you're just going to have to kind of say you want to say something. Okay, so speak up if you need to. And I'll open it up. Trustee Bill McPherson.
Through the chair. I'll admit, the board itself is about 20 years old, and our main corporate logo is 20 years old. But there's been initiatives come forward that have actually confused us, because crew is lots of times receiving as much prevalence as UCDSB. So are we going to perhaps look at, instead of multiple identifiers, going with one instead of several? Like every time we seem to do an initiative, there's another logo pops up. We've got steel, we've got Boundary 2020. It just seems that every time we did something, there's another logo that shows up in the letterhead. So I think this is well timed. We're entering a new era, and I think it's very important because, and I guess one of the questions we're going to have to ask ourselves is, do we refresh and update like some companies do, or do we do like other ones, like Coca-Cola has been the same for generations? But one thing I'd like us to see is figure out why the C in Upper Canada is broken. I've never figured that one out.
Post it now.
Yeah.
Superintendent Hobbs, you want to comment in terms of what Trustee McPherson was talking about? And you mentioned that in your presentation, that there's different labels.
Mr. Chair, first, I have no idea why the C is broken. But yeah, I think you've hit on a really good point about things like crew and other slogans, logos, those things. And sometimes what happens is those things take on a life of their own and threaten to sort of subsume the board's identity, right? Like it becomes a replacement for the board identity. And so I think this is a really good opportunity for us to just do an inventory of what's out there and then start asking ourselves those questions about why is it this way and how should it be, right? And I think the question of school branding, if you will, is a completely different question than what we do here at the central office, and that's something that I think a small number of people relatively could just do a cleanup, so that's definitely the intent.
Comments, questions? Mr. McDonald?
Just, I wanted to clarify on the second last slide, I think it is, proposed deliverable and timelines. When you say establish a brand governance committee, you're not talking about governance from a policy perspective. You're talking about governance of how we roll out that. So it's completely an internal committee that you're looking for, and is starting to work on that timeline to get to in April 2016. Further information coming back. I just want to clarify that.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Small G governance, yeah.
So not involving.
That's correct, yeah.
Anyone on the telephone lines?
Through you, Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Now, I know we've been kind of really marketing the family. We have my family room, and in the kindergarten panel, we have our family welcomes your family. Will we be looking at encompassing this within our brand?
Trustee Swan, my inclination would be yes, all of those things would be on the table. I think the first thing to do is just sort of lay out what's out there, and then decide what role should each of these things play, right? Versus the board's brand, and how prominent should the board brand be. So yes, that is definitely the intent.
And a secondary, through you, Chair?
Certainly, go ahead.
Have we set aside an amount for budgeting for how much we're going to put towards our new branding, if it's going forward?
Trustee Swan, I don't think we're even close to that stage right now. I think if we take a look at the stages, it's a matter of just kind of clarifying, bringing things together. I don't see us being at that stage for quite a while.
Okay, I just meant the process in the next 6 months. How much time and money we're going to put towards this?
During the 6 months, you mean?
Yes.
I'll turn that over to Superintendent Hobbs.
Mr. Chair, my sort of inclination would be near zero. It might be the odd mileage claim to bring a principal or somebody else in to participate in some of the thinking, but other than that, the intent here is to do something low cost to get our arms around this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else on the phone lines? Trustee McAllister.
Thank you, Chair. Superintendent Hobbs, I think you've done a really good job of elaborating the problem. The solution, of course, is the bigger challenge. I really like the Volkswagen Procter & Gamble RBC analogy, notwithstanding the fact that I am an owner of a TDI data subject to recall and something about which I'm not very pleased. But nevertheless, I digress. The Volkswagen, in my opinion, would be our parents, our students, our community, the face that they see. Procter & Gamble would probably be the the corporate entity that we are, and RBC, well, probably an amalgam of both. But Tip O'Neill, the American politician, said that all politics is local. In this case, I would say almost all public relations, all branding is local. And unless we find a solution to that locality of the problem, then I don't think we're going to hit the nail on the head whatsoever. So, and those are a few preliminary thoughts, and I think you're going about this in absolutely the correct way. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought you were going to say you drove a Bentley. It's Bentley product.
I wish.
Trustee Cram.
Thank you, Chair. Superintendent Hobbs, on the proposed delivery timetable, you've got the new governance in May of 2016 and the standards and consolidation proposal in April. Should they be the other way around, or can you explain that a little bit more?
Do you mind flipping back? Yes. This should be the other way around. I'm sorry.
With supplemental, Mr. Chair?
Yes, certainly.
Chair,
Certainly, I did. Go ahead, Trustee Cram.
Would you be, Superintendent Hobbs, would you be amenable to a interim report coming back in March, which is about halfway through, just to have some idea where we are?
Certainly would.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, well, I have a motion, and we're probably going to have to amend the motion, but I'll just read it out. We can add to it before we even bring it to the floor. It's the motion that the Upper Canada District School Board of Trustees approve the proposed initial steps for addressing the board branding, but we could at this point add what you were asking for. If you want to, well, we can just, we won't even need to amend it yet. We can just make it as a new motion, so, because the motion isn't on the table yet. So, can you just explain the last part again so I can get that written down?
Just an interim report to come back in March of 2016.
Okay, so the motion would read this way. That the Upper Canada District School Board of Trustees approve the proposed initial steps of addressing the board branding with an interim report in March 2016.
I think instead of just with, as well as.
As well as?
Because it's adding to the timeline that's in the report, and if you say with the interim, then you're kind of, it seems like it's a stop point.
All right, so what I'm going to do is ask someone to move the motion, but I'm going to read it out as I have it before me. for me? That's the Upper Canada District School Board of Trustees approved the proposed initial steps for addressing board branding, not in addition, as well as an interim report, March 2016. Do I have a mover? Trustee Cram, Trustee McAllister. I'll read it one more time, that the Upper Canada District School Board of Trustees approve the proposed initial steps for addressing the board branding as well as an interim report to the board in March 2016.
Just,
Pointer.
I think Trustee McDonald has complicated the issue because there's a linguistic non-parallel.
Would you prefer in addition to?
I would, because we're not approving the report in March, which is the way it reads now.
You had that the first time, didn't you? It was moved by, there has been changes. It was initially moved by Trustee Cram, seconded by Trustee McAllister. We have to vote on the amendments. Okay. So I need a vote. Actually, it's been now amended. That the Upper Canada District School Board of Trustees approved the proposed initial steps for addressing the board branding in addition to an interim report to the board March 2016, moved by Trustee Cram, Trustee McAllister. Any comments or questions? I should have cast your votes. Trustee McPherson?
Okay, I just don't quite like the way it's written, but
That carries. Thank you very much. Thank you, Trustee McAllister, for that, straightening that out for us. It does read better. Thank you. Okay, moving on to policy review. These are the responsibility of Trustee McAllister when we were looking at policy reviews. And we are now at the point of looking at policy 203, appointment of administrative and supervisory personnel. And I'll turn this over to Director Patterson, who's going to introduce Superintendent.
Oops.
That guy. You're not going to live that one down tonight.
No, I know.
All right, well, thank you very much, Chair McMillan. I believe this is the final policy of the 17 policies that have been reviewed, the appointment of administrative and supervisory personnel. When we reviewed this policy, we determined that it was almost a hybrid of policy and procedure in the policy, and so we were trying to separate out the procedural aspects that were identified in the policy, which would generally lie with administration, from the policy statement itself, which of course lies with the board. And so did provide Mr. Superintendent Hobbs an opportunity to review this policy in his role as HR superintendent. And essentially what you see before you is the deletion of the procedural aspects, which of course are captured in our procedures, in our hiring processes. And what's left is the final paragraph that basically identifies that the board gives authority to the director for the hiring of supervisory personnel. So, Superintendent Hobbs, is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
No, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
Okay, are there comments or questions? Telephone lines? Okay, seeing there are none, I have a motion before me that the Upper Canada District School Board approve policy 203, appointment of administrative and supervisory personnel with revisions as submitted October 28th, 2015, moved by Trustee Richards, seconded by Trustee Bill McPherson. And I'll ask you to cast your votes.
I'm in favor. I'm not seeing them.
Thank you, trustee Swan.
I haven't got a vote yet.
I'm in favor.
Trustee, thank you very much. Trustee Richards and trustee McPherson.
Nothing's come up yet.
And trustee Garrell.
Nothing came up.
But it hasn't come up because it hasn't come on the screen. We're just getting the vote there. Okay, if you can do it now, please. Thank you for those on the phone lines. Okay. Trustee Garrow, you've joined us. Trustee Cram, you're staying. Okay, that carries, and thank you. And I want to take this moment right now. This was the end of this, so I want to thank on behalf of the board trustee McAllister for taking the lead on this. This has been a big job, and I think it's certainly been very worthwhile in terms of tidying up a lot of the policies that we had. So on behalf of the board, thank you very much for that work. Okay, moving on to the next item. It's, am I missing something?
No, I'm good.
Careful now. The report of the Special Education Advisory Committee, SEAC, and I'm going to turn that over to the chair of that committee, Bill McPherson.
Thank you. If we're not careful here, we're going to set a new record for board meeting.
That's why you're going to take your time on this.
We'll drag this one out a wee bit. We met on the 6th of October in the boardroom here. Fairly light agenda that night. We had a presentation from the Leeds and Grenville and Lanark District Health Unit by Emily Castle talking about roots of empathy. And actually this is a pretty amazing program because they take a baby, like not even a toddler, but a baby, and they literally put them in charge of the classroom. And it really brings out the empathy in the kids for understanding how not to upset somebody, because, well, I know from past experience, babies are very easily upset. And so it was really quite amazing. And we talked about, looked at a video clip, and when they first mentioned that the babies were in charge of the classroom, I thought, oh yeah, right. But when you watch it, you see how it happens. And then Superintendent Allen gave another glowing report on our spec ed programming, and we talked about the allocation of educational assistance and the fact that a lot of these moves will occur after Thanksgiving. And then we looked at the Shake It Off video on UCTV as what we're able to do in-house with our own people. And then old business, we brought up the National Inclusive Education Month again. And it seems to be a work in progress. We're still lacking direction from the Brockville District Association for Community Inclusiveness. Their meeting was postponed, so they didn't come to us with any sort of a guideline. And of course, there's the outstanding question is, does the board need to declare February National Inclusive Education Month? But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. We did have some updates on the labor environment, talking about negotiations and things like that, and just basically how it's affecting spec ed kids in the classroom. And that's just about it. So I present the report of the spec ed committee to the board. Thank you.
Very much. I'm going to limit to 30 questions, so are there any questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Seeing there are none?
Chair,
Yes.
just if I could go back to the policy for just 1 second, if you don't mind. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the work of Lisa Raymond in keeping track of me and keeping track of the policies and tracking them. So she did an excellent job, so thank you, Lisa.
And Lisa Workman did the work too, how about
What did I say?
Raymond?
I'm sorry.
It's just one of those nights, I think. Thank you for mentioning that, yes, certainly. Okay, moving on to the next, to our, we're counting on you here. This is the report of the Ontario Public School Boards Association. I'll turn it over to our director, David McDonald.
Thanks, I can fill the time for sure, no problem there. I just wanted to brief trustees on the regional meeting that was held here last Saturday. I'll speak to a couple of points, but certainly my colleagues who were present can have an opportunity to join in. The two particular areas that I wanted to speak to around current OPSPA issues were community hubs update and the GSN feedback from the ministry, information and timelines. I'll start off with the GSN piece. The ministry has released a document called the 2016-17 Education Funding Consultation Guide. They release that on an annual basis. They send it out to boards, broader public sector, and to the associations that represent the boards. OPSPA will be conducting or completing a submission and submitting it during this process to the ministry. It will line up in the past on what would be included in our funding portfolio under the work that OPSPA does and our priorities. There's also an opportunity for boards to provide submissions to the ministry, and certainly boards can provide submissions to OPSPA. The areas that they're looking for information on, that's telling, because what they're looking for information typically is how they're going to justify the announcements they make when the GSNs come out. So it's important for us to pay attention to that and potentially have some alternate solutions or feedback that we can provide to the ministry and or OPSPA when we provide the overall feedback that we would want to give. The key areas that they're looking for information response on is efficiencies and reinvestments, continuing to make more efficient use of school space. They've got this one lumped together, but it breaks down into a bunch of different sectors. It's called equitable education, I think is the title, but it's not equity in education in the sense of gender and racial equity. It deals with special education, First Nation, the kind of the gamut associated to it, language grant, and the student at risk grant. They're also looking for expanded accountability, feedback on expanded accountability measures. So those are the key areas that they're looking for information from the boards and the associations on. And it's important to note that we looked at, or I mentioned earlier, the efficient use of school space. We know that there's a lot of work that's happening around the community partnership protocol, I think is what it's called, the hub piece. Efficiencies and reinvestments, that all deals with the school board efficiencies and modernization strategy, so some work that school boards need to do to become more efficient. But the special education grant piece, there's some language in the guide that talks about the high needs allocation. The high needs amount of the allocation, as we know, has dwindled across for many boards and has started to increase for some boards. It's a redistribution of the revenue across all the boards in Ontario. And as we see the decline in our funding on each high needs amount, there was to be other pieces of the puzzle that were supposed to come in and help us. And those are in the statistical, I can't recall the name of it. There's a statistical prediction model and a measure of variability piece that they're going to apply. But all of that information is reliant on the census data. As we know that the long-form census has been replaced by a national household survey. And I think the ministry has understood now, or realizes the fact that there's not as much information as they can access with the national household survey. So they're looking for feedback on what other models should we be looking at across the province to help fund when it comes to that type of funding. When I raised the issue at the regional meeting, I certainly raised the point that the ministry tends to use bad data to make decisions on how they dole out information. Census data is antiquated right now, but the lack of it is even worse. So at least they acknowledge that they've got something that they need to tweak a little bit. I'm not quite certain that we want to go back to an ISA claim model because it took a lot of work to get the money, but we knew the money was coming in for a particular student. So there needs to be a bit of a blending of some sorts that has to happen. So that's an important piece I think that we need to focus on. Those are the key areas anyway. Students at risk as well, obviously, another area that we have to focus on. Language grant, accountability measures. So this is really dealing with school board, resource sustainable index, measure to collect and make public the potential risks of using these measures. They go through a guideline of what they're looking for, and the guideline is about 30-some pages, if I'm not mistaken, that we need to review and provide some feedback. So I've had some discussions with Superintendent Bartley, and certainly there's some discussion with the senior team. I've had some discussions with Director Patterson. It's important for us as trustees to have an idea of what the impact is for us as this moves through, and if there's anything that we can do to provide our suggestions, our solutions potentially to the ministry, then we should be talking about those and bringing that forward. The timeline is quite tight, though. We need to try and get this done fairly quickly within the month of November. So I would suggest that we provide further information out to the trustees, and potentially at a meeting in November we can have some further discussion on it. Of course, as well, tonight we've got some time. The other piece that I wanted to touch upon was community hubs update. So I think we've heard a lot of what's happening around the province around community hubs, but there is still some updates that need to be put forward. As we know, the process rolled out last spring, and in August, the Community Hub Strategic Framework and Action Plan was released, and there were 8 recommendations associated to that. And just to highlight those 8 pieces: create a provincial lead for community hubs, foster integrated service delivery, develop a provincial strategy for public properties, remove barriers and create incentives, support integrated and long-term local planning, ensure financial sustainable community hubs, increase local capacity, evaluate and monitor outcomes. We've seen through some of the guidelines that the ministry has released that they're addressing some of those. The next significant piece that they've addressed is probably the first recommendation, I think it was, create a provincial lead. Well, we have money that's being allocated now to a secretariat. We have a community hub secretariat that operates out of the Premier's office. Nancy Renick has been appointed a 1-year term as an assistant deputy minister to overview the community hub secretariat, oversee the community hub secretariat. OPSPA staff will continue to review strategic framework and action plans and recommendations and provide feedback. So what we wanted to elicit out of the regional meetings was to get some feedback on the action plan recommendations and around the regulation 4/98, which deals with the surplus property and getting rid of it. We heard that earlier tonight. So we looked at some things around the action plan. We had input from all of the boards, and I think it's safe to say that many boards in Eastern Ontario that the Eastern region represents is mostly rural, and most of the capacity that we're dealing with is going to be located within the school. Most schools are not in a pressure situation where they have not enough space, with the exception of Ottawa. Ottawa is the only exception probably to any of our boards in Eastern Ontario, that they need more space than they actually have within their buildings. Not in all areas of the board, but in some areas. So they would potentially be looking at community partnerships or community hub use, potentially for themselves in other parts of the city. In most cases, I would suspect that community hub use will be probably coming back to the access and use of school space. So that work needs to continue. It needs to make sure that it is compliant or complementary to the work that we do as a board of education, and that's to meet student achievement goals that we've set and to have student success at our forefront. I think it's important that we continue to monitor that. Our guidelines that we put out for some consultation will help us with that. But certainly the work that we do through OPSPA and any feedback that we can give to OPSPA will be helpful. We also had individual board updates, and many boards are doing lots of activity around strategic planning or PARGs and those types of things that are ongoing. Information updates, I always will provide that information to you. Public Education Symposium is January 28th and 30th. in Toronto. That's usually good work that comes out of OPSPA. It's an opportunity for all trustees across the province to come together and have professional development. And it is the mandate of OPSPA to make sure that they help with that process. So it's a good opportunity for trustees to be involved. So if you're interested, I recommend that you consider going and talking to Lisa about that. Children Youth Mental Health Summit is in April. And again, OPSPA, this is something that occurs every second year. So OPSPA is looking for a contingent of people coming from boards to make sure that they have an opportunity to hear some of the good things that are happening. And there's an award that's being presented. I couldn't recall what Judith had said, but there's some significance to this particular date that they're actually having a provincial piece that's rolling out through youth mental health that particular date. So I'll get you more information on that as we get closer. And of course the OPSPA AGM, June 9th and 12th in Ottawa. I'm not sure where it is exactly yet, but it's in Ottawa. And if you have an opportunity to go to that one, I would suggest that the trustees take that opportunity. The AGM is a good conference. It's mixed with some PD and obviously the business of operating OPSPA. There's all that stuff around policy review and adapting new bylaws or making changes that are required, and voting in our president and first vice president, second vice president. So I would suggest that if you have an opportunity to go to that, it's so close that you take the opportunity to make it to the AGM. Oftentimes it's fairly got quite a distance associated to it, so it's not really in the best opportunity for some trustees to attend. That is just the brief update that I have so far, Chair, on the regional meeting that took place on Saturday, and certainly if there's anything I've missed that other trustees want to cover, I'd be happy to let them have a chance.
Thank you. Are there any, a lot of information. Carol, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think he's covered it.
I just want to ask David a question, if I could.
Certainly.
There's quite a distinction, isn't there, between this whole community hubs policy and PARG, which is the pupil allocation review guidelines. And I'm wondering if we are providing the community enough information on this, because the reason I ask is I'm looking at the survey that was announced today on Twitter and Facebook, and one would have to be pretty aware of what's going on in order to understand it. And I'm just wondering if questions 4 and 5, which deal with the school closures policy and the planning and partnership guideline, the facility collaboration policy, if we couldn't guide people a little bit more in terms of, what are the issues, and do you agree, not agree, etc. And that's just one thing, but I'm just saying, do you think that there is not a conflict, but a confusion potential with regard to the two topics?
I think across the province there's potentially, I won't speak necessarily to the survey, but there's a potential for that. And I think, quite honestly, trustees across the province are confused. There is some confusion as to community use of schools and community hubs, which is the piece around the community partnership, and the PARG process. So the confusion is there, whether it was intended or not, and can there be work done to understand both, I guess. I think from a PARG standpoint, there's a requirement within PARG to make sure that the broader community is involved and have some feedback, and that broader community is your general public, but also municipalities associated to that. The community partnership piece goes that one step further, which really involves the municipalities. It's not intended, it can be, but it's not intended to be a piece of consultation or legislation for the general public to be involved in the community partnership. I mean, it's there for that, but it's the focus has been to make sure that the municipalities are consulted on the use of our buildings. And I say municipalities, it needs to be broadened a little bit because there are more to it than just municipalities. it has to, unfortunately, it's happening at the same time because of, I think, the mandate or the agenda that the ministry has to really deal with the efficient use of space. It really all comes down, in my view, to that. Boards need to have their ducks in a row around park. They need to have their ducks in a row around community partnership. And if the ministry feels that those two pieces are aligned, the next piece comes in, which is the squeeze on the efficient use or effective use of space. And that's when the difficult comments and questions are going to come, because our funding will start to get limited, but yet we have to go back to the communities to justify how we're going to deal with that space that we're not going to get funded for. So I see where you're coming from, but if we separate them, I think there's an appearance of a bait and switch potentially. So having them together, it might make it confusing to the general public. But I think they have to be tied together for the purpose of at least monitoring or having that conversation with municipalities. So it's brought out. The intention is also for us to have those conversations with municipalities across the province, not just in a survey format. Mm-hmm. So the survey format is really intended for the consultation around the PARG, and the more consultation around face-to-face conversation with municipalities. I think they need to be hand in hand, but there needs to be maybe better clarification around it. But I think it's important that they're there.
Becky, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Just to follow up with Trustee McAllister's observation with regard to the confusion, I would concur, and you may be aware that we postponed the issue of the consultation through the surveys as a result of our worked rule, and then made the decision to go ahead with it. It could very well be that communities, parents, etc., there is some confusion, and just as Vice Chair McDonald was mentioning the reasons why. So it could very well be that we could follow up with some clarification, which in itself might encourage or enhance the response rate that we get back. Mm-hmm. So thank you. I'll look into that.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Anyone on the telephone lines? Thank you. Seeing there are none, I'm going to, I don't normally ask student trustees to talk for an hour, but I'm going to turn it over to our student trustee, Alex Isaac.
Thank you very much. All right, so this report will kind of be my monthly review for October of 2015. So first off, at the beginning of the month, I attended the fall general meeting of for the Ontario Student Trustees Association in Toronto. It was a packed agenda that included many guest speakers, such as Andrew Horvath, Jenna Ecker, and Bruce Rodriguez, the CEO of EQAO. We split into breakout sessions between the Public Board Council and the Catholic Board Council. And so as the Public Board Council, we decided on the initiatives that we had worked towards throughout this year. These initiatives included mental health awareness, how dress codes are enforced in our schools, and advocating for gender-neutral washrooms in our schools. In addition, I joined the Data and Research Committee within OSTAECO, where our goal for the year is to put out a survey targeted towards parents, students, and educators to gather information on what they think about our current education system and topics such as the new physical education curriculum. Now going on to Student Senate. This past Friday, we had our first Student Senate meeting of the year on the 23rd of October. It was held in Kemptville at the North Grenville Municipal Center. First off, I'd like to thank Chair of the Board Jeff McMillan, First Vice Chair Carol Karkner, Trustee John McAllister, and Superintendent Phil Dawes for being in attendance. I appreciate it very much, so thank you for that. Another big thank you goes out to Lisa Workman for all the work that she's done to help me plan this event through the past few months. Our meeting included a full agenda which had featured guest speaker Josh Beckstead, who spoke about his journey through life and challenges that he has faced. I cannot recommend him enough. He did an amazing job. He was a great speaker for our first event, and had a very positive message for our senators. We had introductions, leadership activities, and explained the role of the student senators, the House leaders, and the student senate. We also had House leader elections, which were our main four leaders within our student senate. We had discussions between senators within their family of schoolhouses, which were led by those 4 House leaders. And we had one big discussion topic where Casey Nielsen, principal of Caldwell Public School, and Champions for Kids, director of fundraising, along with a group of very well-spoken grade 6 leaders, came to discuss with us, with the senators, possible fundraising opportunities within our schools for Champions for Kids. And so some of these big ideas included having senators assist elementary schools with these fundraising projects, and having a dedicated Champions for Kids day or week, probably sometime in the spring. The Student Senate plans to follow up on this initiative at the next meeting in December. And so that is my month in review as a student trustee. Thank you very much.
Are there any comments or questions that you'd like to throw at our student trustee?
Just a comment
Mr.
that
Carson.
quite impressed with the way you led the meeting on Friday, and wish you all the best in the future meetings that you will be chairing. It was very well organized.
Thank you very much.
And I certainly agree with you on that. It's interesting for us as trustees to be there and to sit back and watch the personality and the character of our student trustee comes out. Because each one of you has led the meetings in different ways. You certainly you take charge in a very powerful and meaningful way, but a very kind and caring way. So I think I'm looking forward to the next few, and you certainly bring great leadership to that team. And you have ended up with some great House leaders, and I think that working with you, I think it's going to have a huge impact, and be able to get at some of the things that I know you value and you see as important. So thank you. You're doing a great job.
Thank you very much.
Just a comment, when it came to choosing the House leaders, one of the groups had a tie. So they had to put into effect their constitutional outline on how to break a tie, and it's the same as the Board of Trustees have to break a tie. And they weren't too fond of the idea at first when we said it was a draw, but then we explained what it meant by a draw, and I think they seemed to be a little more content with that. So it was interesting to watch the...
And you're right, and I think that the thing that was powerful about that, because I don't think students always understand the impact or the power of bylaws and why they exist. And first meeting, we had a chance to actually prove why they're there. So, excellent job. Okay. How are we doing there, Trustee McPherson, time-wise? We hit the record yet?
Land speed record.
We're not done yet.
No.
I'm going to turn this over to the director for some remarks, because we're going into a private session following this, so we're going to do this first.
Thank you so much. I have pages of comments.
Trustee McPherson is counting on that.
Really, the 3 items that I wanted to share with you tonight really revolve around well-being, either student well-being or staff and corporate well-being. And so I wanted to first of all acknowledge the great work of Kyle Tarr and Randy Giveau. They co-convened the Upper Canada Cup cross-country meet at Memorial Park here in Brockville. There were 1,200 athletes, runners from across our board, all our elementary schools from every corner of our board. Superintendent Coombs is their champion, and he was there in full force, handing out medals. He was planning on running one of the events, but I don't think that actually happened. He was so busy handing out the medals.
I did run a bit.
Okay.
I came last.
So I just, the physical part of student well-being is so important for our students and for their achievement. And I just really want to particularly acknowledge the hard work, and I'm sure it's a lot of work that Randy and Kyle took on in order to host what I understand was the 3rd 3rd annual Upper Canada Cup for for primary to grade 8 students. It was great. Secondly, again within the last week, I had the opportunity to attend the Equity and Inclusion Youth Forum at North Granville Complex, and once again a very powerful event. The guest speaker was a woman from Vancouver, Kate Reed. She's a musician, and she basically through her music tells her own story and also advocates for LGBTQ students and people in general, and it's very powerful message and very entertaining presentation as well. And then we broke up into small groups where many of them were student-led, and that of course is always wonderful to see the students taking charge. And I had the great pleasure to sit beside Alex and his colleague from RO, so it was a very good event. So thank you so much for the trustees who were there, and thank you to Susan Edwards, who's the superintendent champion in that regard, and the Equity and Inclusion Network who planned the event. And lastly, tomorrow morning in Toronto, Excellence Canada will award the Upper Canada Board the Healthy Workplace Platinum Award for the work that we have done over the last number of years in promoting a healthy workplace, focused on continuous improvement and the use of data to sustain improvements in not only our staff, individual staff wellness, but also our corporate wellness as well. So this has been a long journey of about 10 years, and we have over time been awarded level 1, 2, and 3, and this is the 4th level. It's the ultimate level. I understand we're the only school board in Canada who has received this award, and the media release that went out acknowledged, and rightly so, acknowledged the leadership of Linda Billing, who worked for the school board for a number of years and really led the charge as it related to staff wellness. And unfortunately, Linda has passed away, but certainly we have fond memories of her and are very pleased with the work that she led, and others, of course, have led in her since she left the board. So that's a good news story for Upper Canada as it relates to staff and corporate wellness. And those are my 3 little pieces.
Thank you very much, Director Patterson. I don't have a lot that I want to say. I think I've said this the last few meetings, and I think it bears saying it again. I want to thank all of our staff, administrative staff, and other staff members who are doing the very best that they can under challenging times. I know when I know a few of us were at the cross-country meet, and our staff was there, cheering the kids on, doing everything that they do on a day-to-day basis, and I know it's a very trying and challenging time for everyone, and I do admire them for doing what they're doing. Our administrative staff, principals, vice principals who are carrying that extra load, it just, almost every meeting we say the same thing, but we notice and we certainly appreciate what you're doing. I know that our next director, Stephen Sliwa, at least he tells me, he could well be watching, tells me that he tunes into these meetings. Stephen, I do want to say this, and I want to make this very clear. When you get here, these board meetings are not going to be this short, I can promise you that. You might just as well know that now. It may appear, I think, to the public that our meetings don't have a lot on the agenda, but there's a lot of things happening that kind of put us where we are right now. So, Stephen, if you're watching, and I'm glad you are, get ready. And the rest of you, remember to bring your sleeping bags like we used to in the old days. And the last thing that I want to say before we go into a private session is I know that Trustee Cram is heading off on a long trip. And Trustee Cram, I wanted to know that we want you to have a safe travel. We will miss you at the board table. And but all of us want you to have a wonderful time and be safe.
Thank you.
And I do know, Trustee McAllister, I'm not sure if there's a board meeting between now and the time you go.
I think there's one before I go.
All right. I'll
I'll be
save
here.
one. I'll save my best wishes until then. So, having meeting's done, I broke my glasses. We're done. How'd that happen? Okay. So I need we're going to be moving into private session. I need a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board move into private session, Committee of the Whole, moved by Trustee Bill McPherson, seconded by Trustee Cram. And we'll just do a vote or show of hands. And that everyone's in favor. Thank you. So we'll take a second, and then we'll go into private session.